This is Stereoactive Presents. I'm your host, Jeremiah McVay, and in this episode, I'm joined by Charles Hinshaw to discuss The Beguiled, a film written and directed by Sofia Coppola and distributed by Focus Features. The Beguiled stars Nicole Kidman, Kirsten Dunst, Colin Farrell, and Elle Fanning. In just a moment, you'll hear Chuck's review, followed by my discussion with him about the film.
The Beguiled is a pleasantly small movie. These days, I'm pretty used to movies being big in some way, either the subject matter, tragedy, almost to a Greek level, or racism, or violence, or some kind of big issue is involved in a lot of movies, particularly the dramas. Movies also are very long, and even the action movies, which at a time, it was almost sacrilege to make an action movie longer than 2 hours. Now it's pretty standard to have any movie be 2 hours and 20 minutes plus. And also in this summer season, the action is huge. The explosions, the robots, the superheroes, it's all very big. This movie is small on all those scales. It's a very simple plot. A Union soldier is found by a young girl who is living with several other young girls and women in a seminary in the South during the Civil War, and he is injured and stuff happens. I hesitate to go further because the movie is so simple that to go even further than that into the plot in this review is to sort of give stuff away that if I was listening to this, I wouldn't want to know. I think it's about maybe 130 in length, and not a lot in terms of action happens. If you could see me, I would use air quotes, which is to say that it's not a big event movie. They kind of exist. Certain shocking elements occur, but a lot of the movie is spent just with these people interacting amongst themselves. It's reminiscent to me of The Twilight Zone in a way, something sort of normal becomes disturbing. There's also a Twilight Zone episode where a soldier comes to a house that's essentially deserted and only has the woman figure there. And so it was very similar to me in that regard. It's also reminiscent of European art cinema in not only how subtle it is, but also in how little about the characters we really know or ever get to know. And we kind of just have this single snapshot of their lives, this several months that occur, and then that's all we ever get to know about them. I enjoyed that part of it. I like a lot of European art cinema, and I love The Twilight Zone, and I like subtlety. I like the smallness. I like going to a movie and not having it be so big all the time, although I love big movies, and I appreciated that part of the artistry. Colin Farrell is the soldier. The three women are Nicole Kidman, Kirsten Dunst, Elle Fanning. I think there's three little girls whose names I don't know, but I would suggest you look them up because I thought all the performances were very good and they were a really tight ensemble. I appreciated all of that and I enjoyed it. I was never checking my watch, but I will say that I think it would have been a much more powerful movie if some of the subtlety gave way to more information about what these characters were going through, where they were coming from, and kind of raising the stakes to some degree on what they all wanted from one another. And that being said, I think if you're a cinephile especially, this is the movie for you.
From this point on, we may discuss elements of the plot that some could consider spoilers, so if you don't want to know anything about the movie before you see it, we hope you will come back and listen to this at some point. So, Chuck, I think we're sort of on the same page with this movie.
Okay.
Maybe you liked it slightly more than I did, but I did like it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it didn't blow me away or anything, but
Right.
I thought it was overall pretty good. That said, I think there are some problems that maybe we'll get to that a lot of people are pointing out that are hard to ignore. Yeah, I think that you touched on something, the subtlety, I think you said.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to put my finger on it, and I think that is the perfect word. This movie is about subtlety and how subtle you can be and still tell a story and still give a little bit of character. Because
Right.
and I think that that's tied up in the southernness, quote unquote,
Right.
of the whole situation. And there's a lot of being proper and not giving yourself away that I guess makes a lot of sense because this is like a school for women
Mm-hmm.
where they're supposed to be learning about how to be a lady.
Right.
But yeah, there were moments where I was like, how subtle can you be
Right.
and not sort of lose the thread?
Yeah.
Did you ever have that sort of a fear about it, or did you even see it cross over towards that at all?
I didn't. I have a pretty high tolerance for that kind of thing. I'm a big fan of Terrence Malick, who is the king of that sort of thing. I was actually watching a movie with my mother recently, the New World, and partway through, she's like, "Wow, his pacing just like comes to a stop," and it's not untrue. And like I said, a lot of that European art cinema that I've actually gotten into more over the past couple of years, I haven't liked all of it, but it also is very much just like people sitting in rooms and, you kind of just roll with it. So I didn't feel that way because I feel like I'm more up for that sort of experience. But I totally would understand if other people felt that way.
You also touched on the length of the movie.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important factor here because, like, I think the amount of subtlety that she was after with this and I guess accomplished goes hand in hand in terms of it being successful with this not being overly long.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think it would have been really easy for you to add 5 or 10 minutes to this movie and you just kind of feel like, well, that just did it. I'm done here. I no longer like this.
I think she also punctuates it with some really jarring moments that kind of, if there wasn't that, I might have gotten bored earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some of the things that I found really compelling were some of the simplest things, like when he first arrives and Nicole Kidman is sponging him and he's unconscious. And the way she took her time with that scene, I thought was really powerful because it said, we're going to stop and pay attention to what is happening between these two people in silence and in simplicity. Also, there was almost a horror sort of aspect to it where they're like dressing his wound and you get these pretty grisly close-ups of them stitching him up and stuff. And so that added to that element that, again, I sort of bring up the Twilight Zone, that there was a kind of spooky quality to the movie. And I think that also aided that subtlety because there was always a sense of what's going to happen next.
Right.
You're kind of waiting for things to blow up and get crazy. So there was like a little bit of a tension. If that wasn't there, this subtlety would also wear thin earlier, I think.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's that the subtlety of the performances is about these women being very mannered, and those manners are there to kind of mask something.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of the purpose of what manners are, and you kind of get a scale of that, and I guess it kind of goes by age too, with those 3 main female actors in this. Of Elle Fanning is sort of the one that's least subtle.
Yeah.
And, she tries to be more or less, but, stuff rings through that she can't hide, especially one of my favorite moments in the movie, like a good laugh moment was when she was in the garden with a hoe and she just looked like a spoiled kid who's like, oh, why do I have to be here?
Yeah.
I thought that was really funny. And then you have Kirsten Dunst, who is like a little more accomplished at pulling it off, like her character, I mean.
Right.
And then Nicole Kidman is like the proper lady who's there to teach them all how to be like her.
Yeah.
So I thought that dynamic between those 3 main actors really worked well. And then you have this weirdo from outside, like not even a foreigner, even really,
right? Who I would say is also well mannered,
sure,
or kind of in the style of the time period as well,
right.
That he's,
or at least at first appears to be.
Yes, yeah. Well, yes, certain things sort of drive him to be less well mannered,
right?
And it's an interesting discussion of like whether he's justified or not in his rage. Maybe not entirely, but
I don't think so.
It is. I mean, it's like I don't, I don't know. It's, to me, there was a moral ambiguity involved.
Right.
And I think that I expected it to be much more like, screw this guy, let's seek our revenge. And I felt like everybody was it was more complicated than that, I ultimately felt.
Right.
Which I appreciated, because not that there's anything wrong with that, but it just isn't as intriguing.
Right. One thing, just a stray note, the look, like the gauziness of it.
Yeah, that was weird.
It sort of reminded me, I think, it didn't hit me until later, that it reminded me of one of her father's movies. The scene that isn't in the original cut, I think, but was in like the Redux of Apocalypse Now,
Sure.
where they're with all the French people out at the mansion in the jungle. Right. There's a similar sort of dreamy, surreal gauziness in those scenes that I think is here, and I really do wonder if she was looking to that as sort of a style point to try to hit.
I don't know. I mean, I certainly, I mean, I think it's difficult not to notice it. I sat very close to the screen, so I was like, which I like to do sometimes, and so I was hyper aware of it in that regard, and to me, it's felt more like pictures you see of that time period where they're not totally in focus, right, and you can't really get at the details. But yeah, I do think, again, going back to that creepiness, the Twilight Zone-y, right, that thing of just, this is something unreal. There's something unreal about it. And the fact that these women are all there by themselves, abandoned. There's nobody else in this movie. And it's very surreal in that way.
Right. And just while you were talking, I thought of another thing that it reminded me of that by coincidence is one of her father's movies. Because some of those first moments when they're like in the parlor or whatever room it is, and Nicole Kidman is in the scene, and it's very dark, to the point, like you were saying, where you can kind of not even see her face that well. And it's not that it's actually obstructed by anything. It's just the lighting, and it kind of reminded me of the cinematography in like The Godfather, which was a big deal. If you've ever watched any like making of documentaries about it, Gordon Willis.
Yeah, Gordon Willis.
He even says he went too far in a couple of scenes where like he's shooting with backlight and you basically get a silhouette.
Yeah.
And it did kind of remind me of those things.
Yeah, I didn't think about it in that way. I think those are valid comparisons. To me, it seemed like the thing that separates them to me is both those movies are very sharp, even in the darkness, right, and even in the and the dream. And what's great about that scene in Apocalypse Now is that the dreaminess is caused by him like blowing smoke and fog into everything, right, instead of like putting something on the camera or something. So in a way, it makes me think that she was just so unconcerned with making things look sharp and noticeable,
right?
And I mean,
I think she had a style in mind, and I assume achieved.
I don't think she can get away from her father ever.
Sure. And it wasn't something that like was overbearing. I didn't even think about it until after the fact, and then it was sort of like it took me 2 steps to get there. Of like, kind of reminds me of that movie. Oh wait, that's her dad.
Right.
Well,
I think I watched Marie Antoinette because I'd never seen it, and it was one that I thought would be valuable to see and then compare it to this one. And she's so inspired by that stuff from the 70s, whether it's her dad or it's foreign movies or whatever, that it's like, regardless of who she, being related or not related, it's just so clearly her thing.
Sure. Sure. So I feel like we'd be wrong to not mention the discussion about whitewashing with this movie.
Sure.
So just for people listening, if you haven't heard, in the original adaptation from 1971, starring Clint Eastwood and directed by Don Siegel, there was a black character in that.
That's what I've read. I have not seen the movie. But...
Yeah, I haven't seen that movie, and I have not read the book. My understanding is that there's a black character in both the original adaptation and in the book, and perhaps that the character that Kirsten Dunst plays in this version was of mixed race in one of those source material, or the source material, or the other adaptation. Right. I'm not positive about that.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that, but I did hear that there was a black female slave character,
right,
that features prominently. Is not just like a side character, but features prominently in both the original adaptation and the book.
Right, and so, of course, I think rightfully, people asked Sofia Coppola about this, and her take on it was basically that she didn't feel comfortable taking on that responsibility of portraying that story. And I don't know. I think I side with people on this that doesn't seem like a valid argument on her behalf. Like it does seem weird to me that you would completely extract the black experience from this when it is about a bunch of Southern people. Right. I mean, I think that I'm not saying that you couldn't do it and get away with it, but that seems like a really terrible justification of it.
Sure. I wouldn't have done it that way, I think. And I think I do respect that she, again, is making this tiny movie about this very simple thing. And as I understood it, she was sort of saying that slavery is this large issue that would be tackled amidst this sort of smaller movie, and that instead of kind of half-assing it, she just sort of didn't do it at all.
Right.
I respect that choice. I think when you adapt things, you have to make those choices all the time about cutting things out and simplifying, and about what drew you to the movie in the first place. I mean, this is really about like primal desire.
Right.
And it's not that. And I think, like I said in my review, the problem maybe with the movie in general is that it's not just that there's no black character, it's that the characters themselves are so sort of simply drawn, and it kind of takes away from maybe some of the emotional weight of the movie, that you don't really get to know anybody that well.
Right.
And so it seemed like she just didn't, and it seems also like her MO, to be honest, between what I've seen of her as Virgin Suicides, Lost in Translation, Marie Antoinette, she is not big on giving you a lot to know about her characters.
Yeah, and, I definitely think she's into ambiguity of characterization.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not trying to say that she made a good or a bad decision with that.
Right.
I think it's certainly questionable, and I think I don't know if she was right or wrong in doing that. I think her answer to the critics was dumb.
I mean, it's a movie. And it's a movie that comes from this woman of particular experience. I mean, she's Hollywood royalty, and she is a cinephile, and she's probably those things before she's anything else. I don't know her personally, but it seems like that. And it seems like from her movies, that's what she's all about. You know, that's kind of what this movie is. I guess what I would say is that I don't think that this movie as it stands without a black character diminishes anything. Now, maybe if she had added the black character and thrown that into the mix, we would have gotten a more rich experience with our people on screen.
Right.
And that I would have been interested in seeing that. But having her made that decision not to go into slavery and God forbid she does do it and then does it wrong, the uproar that would come with that.
Right.
Maybe she knew that she's like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I just like these women being attracted to this guy, and then this guy flying off the handle, and the sort of the dreaminess of it all. And that's the movie I'm going to make.
Right.
And I'm not going to pretend that I know what I'm talking about. Or
okay. Thank you, Chuck.
No problem. Real connection to. In a way, I think there is something admirable about saying, like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to pretend that I do. And again, I don't think that anybody's losing anything by that character not being in this very small, low budget indie movie that, quite honestly, only certain people are going to see anyway.
I guess all I mean to say is that I think the criticisms are fair because it is based on something that includes black characters. And to me, that always opens you up to that. Like, why not just come up with your own story if you don't want to include something that was a key element of the original story?
Right.
And I'm not even somebody who thinks that a director or a writer owes anything to their source material other than not making a shitty movie.
Right.
Even if making a not shitty movie means ignoring a lot of the source material. Because a lot of things are not adaptable in a good way.
Yeah.
But I think you got to answer the question sometimes if it comes up. Or choose not to answer the question.
See,
maybe that would have been the better thing here.
I mean, I think, it all comes down to like, she made the choice and she was never going to win.
Right.
Is really what it is, and so you got to just kind of roll with it. But I certainly would have liked to see a version of the movie where the characters were more richly drawn, and where if there is this character who adds a complexity like slavery to the mix, that I probably would have liked that movie more.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Chuck.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to Stereoactive Presents, and thank you to our guest, Charles Hinshaw. The music in this podcast is composed by Hansdale Hsu. My name is Jeremiah Lee McVay. If you like what you hear in the show, please rate and review it in Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows that. Doing so helps us to expand our audience, and it's much appreciated. And please follow us wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Every little bit helps, and like I said, it is truly appreciated. You can also get in touch with us at stereoactivemedia@gmail.com, and you can find more information about this show and everything else that Stereoactive Media is involved with at stereoactivemedia.com. This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.